Today we're diving into one of the most shocking, complicated and honestly still debated moments in art history. The day a radical feminist playwright walked into Andy Warhol's studio and opened fire. This isn't just a true crime story. It's a story about rejection, rage, mental illness, and how a single act of violence can permanently alter the course of art history. So let's get into it. To understand what happened on June 3rd, 1968, you first need to understand the world Andy Warhol had built for himself. By the mid-1960s, Warhol wasn't just an artist, he was a cultural phenomenon. His studio, known as The Factory, was the beating heart of New York's avant-garde scene. Celebrities, artists, musicians, filmmakers, everyone passed through those silver-painted walls. Warhol had a gift for turning the mundane into the iconic, transforming soup cans and celebrity portraits into commentary on consumer culture. But The Factory was also chaotic. It attracted outsiders, eccentrics, and people on the fringes of society. And that's exactly how Valerie Solanas ended up in Warhol's orbit. Valerie Solanas was a writer, a radical thinker, and by most accounts a deeply troubled woman. She'd grown up in a difficult home, experienced abuse, and largely fended for herself from a young age. By the time she arrived in New York, she had focused her anger and her intellect into a provocative piece of writing. The Scum Manifesto. Scum, Society for Cutting Up Men, was a radical feminist text that called, in explosive and often satirical terms, for the elimination of male dominance. It was incendiary, deliberately so. Whether it was meant as pure provocation or a genuine manifesto is still debated by scholars today. Solanas had also written a play, Up Your Bleep, and she believed Warhol was the right person to produce it. She brought him the script, and Warhol, distracted and surrounded by dozens of other creative projects and personalities, either lost it or dismissed it. To Solanas, that rejection wasn't just professional. It felt like erasure. In the months leading up to June 1968, Solanas' mental state was deteriorating. She was reportedly experiencing paranoid delusions, believing that Warhol and others were conspiring against her, trying to control her, steal her work, and silence her voice. Friends and acquaintances later said the signs were there. The paranoia was escalating. She had begun talking about violence. On the morning of June 3rd, 1968, the same day that Senator Robert F. Kennedy would be assassinated just hours later, Valerie Solanas rode the elevator up to the factory on the 6th floor of 33 Union Square West. She was carrying a .32 caliber pistol. Warhol arrived shortly after. Solanas shot him twice. One bullet passed through both lungs, his spleen, his stomach, his esophagus, and his liver. He was clinically dead on the way to the hospital and had to be revived on the operating table. Surgeons later said it was a miracle he survived. She also shot art critic Mario Amaya, injuring him, and attempted to shoot Warhol's manager Fred Hughes before her gun jammed. She then left the building, turned herself in to police that same evening, reportedly telling the officer, "He had too much control over my life." Warhol survived, but he was never the same. He was left with permanent physical damage and wore a surgical corset for the rest of his life. Emotionally, the shooting left deep scars. He became more guarded, more reclusive. Some art historians argue his work shifted after 1968. Darker, more anxious, more preoccupied with death and celebrity mortality. Solanas was arrested, evaluated, and found to be suffering from paranoid schizophrenia. Incredibly, she only served roughly 3 years in psychiatric care and prison. After her release, she largely disappeared from public life. Solanas spent her final years homeless, drifting across New York, Phoenix, and eventually San Francisco, where she lived in the notorious Tenderloin district. She went by different names. She was largely forgotten by the world that had briefly, notoriously, known her name. She died of pneumonia on April 25, 1988.